Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. Today we have back with us Professor Sreejit Datta, and we are going to continue our discussion of the role of 18th century, 19th century legendary Bengali people and their contribution to the nationalist movement, the idea of India, everything, and how they went about it, how much do we know of it and how much do we not know of them, and maybe even we'll get into the misrepresentations, some of them, like we found out in our last live stream with Professor Sreejit Datta, that there are many aspects of Rabindranath that we don't know even today, even though he's probably the most discussed Bengali person of all time. Even then, Sreejit Datta was letting us know of many more aspects that we have absolutely no knowledge of. So today we discuss specifically Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay and Rabindranath Tagore. So, sir, where do we start from?
Hi, Niranjan. Glad to be back on your podcast. So, today's topic, as you have introduced already, is the idea of nationalism as we gain it from two figureheads of nationalism in Bengal and in India in general, Bankim Chandra and Rabindranath. So, I would like to start by giving an idea of the nation as understood, explained, and commented upon by these two figures. So, the sources from which I will be mainly talking today are Bankim's Dharmatattva, Bharat Kolonko, and Bangalar Kolonko. These are three works by Bankim.
Okay.
Dharmatattva is basically a conversation. It's a dialogic text, a dialogue between two characters, simply named Guru and Shishya. So the Shishya asks questions and the Guru provides answers, and the Shishya counters those views put forward by the Guru, and the Guru then explains further. So this is how the entire text of Dharma Tattva is organized. It advances through a question and answer mode in a dialogic way. It's a very interesting text, and it is here where Bankim mainly expounds on his idea of Hindutva. Okay, so even though Bankim had already used the term Hindutva, he is originally the first uh, the person who had coined this term in another of his texts, the more famous novel Anandamat, which was in 1882. It came out. He reuses this term Hindutva in Dharma Tattva, but what is more important is that without even using the term, Bankim has talked about the concept of Hindutva, the horizon of Hindutva, in several of his texts. And this is not just in Anandamat or Dharmatattva. He talks about it in the Bangla essay Bangalar Kolonko as well as Bharat Kolonko. These are two essays that he wrote, and these can be found in his Vividho Prabandho anthology of essays. Uh, Apart from this, even in Kamalakante's Dotto, which is a collection of short sketches in the style of the Confessions of an Opium Eater, uh, that Bankim had written based on a character, a fictional character called Kamalakanta Chakraborty. Even in that book, even in that work, we get to see in a particular sketch called Amar Durgotsav, my Durga Puja. If I try to translate it into English, that title, even in that sketch, Bankim expounds on the concept of Hindutva without naming it as such.
Okay.
Okay, so the name itself is important, but more important than that is the idea that it captures, that it encapsulates, and that idea has been a recurrent theme in Bankim's several writings, in essays, in full-length texts or treatises, such as in Dharma Tattva. Now, even though the title of the work Dharma Tattva might give one an idea that it is an out and out theology based work, that it's a work on theology, because dharma is something to do with religion, and tattva is expounding the essence of dharma. So one might think that it is an out and out religious text or theological text, but it is not so in reality. Theology is, of course, one of the main topics or themes that Bankim Chandra talks about through this conversation between Guru and Shishya. But Bankim Chandra talks about various other aspects of Hindutva, namely the political aspect, the social aspect, and also the cultural, the fine arts, and various other aspects of culture. Uh, all these find a place in Bankim Chandra's Dharma Tattva. Now, from all of that, I will pick up one particular issue, one particular theme or sub theme, if you may, which is the concept of nation and the concept of samaj. Okay, samaj in Bangla.
Right.
Why
Sir,
do I pick this up? Yes,
Sir,
you
before
have a
you
question.
start his idea of nation and samaj, let me just mark them so that we don't forget later on. I have a question. Maybe
Okay.
it will help set the context even more. Getting into the person Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, how is this sort of a career even possible? How does he have so much knowledge of the Bengali language, Sanskrit language, English language, and he knew law because he was a deputy magistrate, and he knows religion. What sort of an upbringing can produce such a person?
Well, maybe I should say that it's thanks to people like Raja Ram Mohan Rai and Raja Radhakanto Dev,
I
who
see.
had really, fought for instituting the liberal English education system,
Hmm.
which was quite new in Bengal.
Hmm.
And if you see, Bankim Chandra is born in 1830s.
Hmm.
So he is born within just 2 decades of
Hmm.
the establishment of the Hindu college,
Hmm.
right? And he is also one of the first graduates of the University of Calcutta, right?
Okay.
He is one of the first BA so of the University of Calcutta. And therefore, Bankim Chandra can be shown or described as one of the first fruits of the English liberal education
I see.
in India.
That's an important quote.
Now, the scope of that education system was vast, multi-pronged, and Bankim Chandra was a prodigious reader as well as a marvelous student. So, partly because of the new education system and the zeal of the educated Bengalis to get their children the best education that was possible, and by best education, this section of Indians, not just Bengalis but also people from Madras, they thought of this liberal education system borrowed from England, um, along with the classics of India
Hmm.
through the study of Sanskrit. So it's interesting that even though we are describing it by the term English liberal system,
Hmm.
English liberal education system,
Hmm.
uh, Sanskrit education and classics or Indian classics based education was also an integral part of it.
Hmm.
Okay, so and that has no essential clash with the liberal education system, because
Hmm.
as part of the liberal education system, classics of the Latin and ancient Greek languages are also, or rather were also, a part of that education system back in Europe. So in the case of India, it makes all the more sense if Sanskrit-based Indian classics and some philosophy and history also becomes part of that education system.
Hmm.
So Bankim Chandra is one of the first great fruits of that system, that newly instituted system.
Hmm.
To answer your question.
Right. Just one follow up, then we'll get to his idea of nation. That
Okay.
the forever let's say qualm about English education has been that it somehow makes you less aware of your own upbringing, or let's say your background, your traditions, your culture, or you go a step ahead and start to think of it in very inferior terms. That everything in my past was bad. Now, was that not the case at all back then when people were getting into the English language education system?
On an average, yes, it was the case that it will make you overtly dependent on the history of England, the culture of England, or rather of all of Europe
Hmm.
in general.
Okay.
But for prodigious students
I
and
see.
talents, geniuses like
Hmm.
Bankim and even Kaliprashanna Singho,
Hmm.
who had translated the Mahabharata,
Hmm.
this was no barrier. In
Hmm.
fact, this had catapulted their quest for
Hmm.
learning
Hmm.
to a higher degree. So Bankim, Kaliprasanna, such people, even Michael Madhusudan, I would like to name him because he did not only read the classics of Europe, but he also assimilated those classics into an Indian language, a modern Indian language, namely Bangla. So when you get to read his Birangana Kabbo, Brajangana Kabbo, and of course the Meghnad Bhatt Kabbo, you get to see that he has followed the model of classical Greek and Latin epics, of the Iliad, Odyssey, and Virgil's Aeneid. Uh, and he has also accepted the best of Valmiki and Vyasa. Okay, this was one of his, he had declared it that he will like to make a conversation between Virgil and the likes of Virgil and Homer and the likes of Vyasa and Valmiki somewhere. So this is, a kind of churning that has happened. You can look at it from today's point of view from a negative perspective, but I think that it had its own contribution in, progressing the Bengali society and the Indian society as a whole. And Bankim Chandra, to begin with, was also enamored by English culture and European culture in general.
I see.
And as many of us are aware, that his first literary work was actually an English novel called Rajmohan's Wife.
Okay.
So, like Madhusudan, Bankim Chandra was also initially fascinated by the power and the glamour of European culture and especially English culture, of the English literary culture, and therefore he had written an English novel. But unlike Madhusudan, Bankim did not spend so much of time, running after a mirage. Okay, Madhusudan has, of course, lamented this
Right.
in an immortalized verse, right? That he had been chasing, a dream which could never be fulfilled, etc. But Bankim did not spend so much time as Madhusudan did. Of course, Madhusudan has produced bulk of his works in Bengali, but he had lost valuable time and energy because he died quite early and in dire circumstances, again as a result of chasing that impossible dream. But Bankim was perhaps more shrewd and luckier in that manner. He did not spend so much of time in chasing the English literary tradition or culture. We get to see that there has been an incident with Bankim, which perhaps was a reason for this sudden turn and an early turn from
Okay.
English literary tradition and English culture as a whole, where despite being an official of the British administration, he faced misdemeanor from an English individual.
I see.
Okay, and unlike many other Bengalis or native Indians, he did not take it lying down. He took this person to court and got an apology. So got a public apology
I see.
from this person.
Okay.
And we get to see that immediately afterwards, Bankim has a more inward, that is to say, a more nationward turn. So perhaps this one incident of a very political and racial nature had something to do with Bankim's early decision to turn inward, to turn
Right.
towards his own national culture and tradition. But similar situation cannot be found in Madhusudan's case. However, I should mention here that a similar incident can be seen in Ram Mohan's case.
Okay.
And that happened also quite early in his career when he had to follow his employer, John Digby, to Bhagalpur. And in Bhagalpur, one British administrator, local administrator in Bhagalpur, had badly misbehaved with Ram Mohan. Okay, so that incident has been quite remarkable. Anyway, today we are not talking about Ram Mohan, we are
Yeah.
talking about Bankim and Rabindranath. So I'll
Yeah.
get back to
Yeah.
Bankim's story.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, Bankim has been one of the greatest and earliest fruits of this English liberal education system, which also incorporated in some part, I must add, not in a large part, the Sanskrit literary tradition, wherein the classics, at least, and grammar were part of the curriculum, and Bankim had ample opportunity to explore these subjects, both at home as well as in his university education. Now, going back to the original theme, which I had started talking about, the theme of samaj or samaja and the idea of nation. I mentioned Bankim's Dharma Tattva, and in Dharma Tattva itself, we get to see a very elaborate discussion about the Hindu Samaj and the Bharatavarshiya Samaj. So, in many cases, both in Bankim's case and in Rabindranath's case, at least, in these two individuals' writings, we get to see that Hindu Samaj and Bharatiya Samaj or Bharatavarshiya Samaj. Bharatavarshiya was, a more familiar term for them. That was much more in vogue rather than Bharatiya. So the Hindu Samaj and Bharatavarshiya Samaj, these two terms or ideas have been used as synonyms. They have been used interchangeably.
I
Okay,
see.
so this is something that we have to mention at the outset. After that, the second thing that we have to remember is that Bankim makes a clear equation between country or nation and samaj. Okay,
Okay.
which is not the case with Rabindranath. Rabindranath makes a clear inequation, so to speak,
Okay.
between samaja and nation. Okay, uh, Rabindranath actually takes the word nation as nation state. Okay,
Okay.
so the concept of nation state and nation are hardly different in the case of how Rabindranath uses them in his anthology of essays called Atma-Shakti, which is the other source that I'm going to talk about. When I talk about Rabindranath today. So Bankim talks about the country or desh as synonymous with samaj. Okay, and in Dharma Tattva, he's expounding on his concept of anushilan tattva, okay, or anushilan tattva, which many people I get to see these days translate as practice, but that's quite misleading. The right
Okay.
way, the proper way to translate anushilan would be cultivation. Okay,
Oh.
what is the difference between practice and cultivation? Bankim himself, clarifies this in Dharma Tattva. He says that there is a clear distinction between Anushilan and Abhyas. Okay, so he uses these two terms, Abhyasa, which can be translated as practice or repetition, and Anushilan, which he proposes to translate as cultivation. Okay,
Okay.
and he makes a clear distinction between these two. He says that abhyasa or practice or repetition is that which is against the current of human tendencies arising from various human faculties. Okay,
Okay.
such as the intellectual faculty, the aesthetic faculty, the physiological faculty, and so on and so forth. So abhyasa, according to Bankim, is repetition or practice which is going against the tide of natural tendencies arising from various human
Right.
faculties. On the contrary, anushilan, cultivation, is that which is going with the tide or which is with going with the current of various tendencies arising from different human faculties. Okay, and he says that each human faculty uh, uh, or the tendencies arising from various human faculties should be balanced against each other. In other
Okay.
words, no one particular tendency arising from, let's say, the intellectual faculty should be given an unlimited scope for improvement and
Okay.
development, not improvement, rather development, so that it hinders the progress or development of other faculties. Okay,
Okay.
and if that sort of a stage can be reached by an individual wherein every single faculty has been given ample scope, not in clash with each other, but in conjunction with each other, so that there is an equilibrium, only then Anushilan is said to be perfect. Okay? In other words, Anushilan will be fulfilled, cultivation will be fulfilled if the human individual allows the growth or development of each and every one of his faculties in a uh, mutually uh, respectful, mutually uh, helpful manner,
Hmm.
so that there is no clash between one with the other.
Hmm.
If one let's say their intellectual or aesthetic faculty grow or develop at the cost of their physiological faculty, then Anushilan has not happened. Anushilan is not perfect
Right.
or is not fulfilled.
Hmm.
Now, after explaining this concept of Anushilan or cultivation, Bankim makes an interesting foray into the discussion of politics, and uh, he says that ultimately the tendencies of every human faculty must be channelized Godward. Okay, I'm coming
Channelized?
to how it channelized Godward, that is towards God. Okay,
Oh. Okay.
so he says that when this sort of equilibrium based growth or development of every human faculty has been achieved or fulfilled through Anushilan or cultivation, then a stage will be reached by the human individual where all their faculties are directed towards or channelized towards the divine, God. Okay, and therefore they will be able to attain what is known as nishkama karma, or the status of nishkama karmi. Okay,
Okay.
so if our faculties are uh, allowed to develop in conjunction with each other without clashing with each other, then
Hmm.
a stage can be arrived at where all these faculties are channelized towards God.
Hmm.
And in that particular state, he says that a person can attain the status of anishkama karmi, that is
Hmm.
selfless action. All the actions by any human faculty will be a selfless act, an act of devotion. He also
Hmm.
describes this as, or rather defines it as bhakti. So you get to see a discussion on this regard in the Upakramanika, that is the prologue of Anandamot. Okay,
Okay.
where there is a description of a very dense forest and there is no light, and suddenly from within that darkness, a voice speaks out, or rather cries out for help. That voice is crying out and asking for help from some sort of a divine figure.
Hmm.
Okay, and it says that I would like to achieve a particular end for the emancipation of my country, for my samaj. Okay, and what is the sacrifice that I have to make? What is the price of it?
Hmm.
Okay, then this the divine voice replies by saying, what do you have to offer? What can you offer?
Hmm.
This is the response from the divine voice. And now this first voice says that I have my life, I can sacrifice my life. Then in response, the divine voice says that life is not very valuable, everybody can give it. And then the first voice asks again, then what else can I give? What else can I sacrifice and offer? Ultimately, the answer comes from the divine voice, bhakti or devotion. Okay.
I
Now,
see.
in order to understand this prologue, one has to read the entire novel of Anandamad. But
Okay.
it also becomes clear if one reads Dharma Tattva, at least in this part where Bankim Chandra is talking about Anushilan and how Anushilan, when it is perfected, when somebody has become a master of Anushilan or cultivation, then only they become a nishkamakarmi, and that itself is the status of a bhakta. That is where bhakti starts. A life of devotion and a true religious life begins from that point onward. Now,
Sir,
from there,
I have a question about this.
can
Okay,
you
okay.
can you
Yeah, yeah. Go
please
on.
hold this question,
Yeah, yeah.
because
Yeah. Okay.
I mentioned that he is making a foray into politics, and I have to show
Right.
this connection.
Yeah.
After that, maybe I can take your
Yeah.
question. Please hold it. So, once Bankim Chandra establishes that, once this perfected status of anushilan is attained by a human individual, they become a nishkamakarmi and a bhakta. He says that that human individual can then feel universal love, and this universal love felt in the heart of the human who's a nishkama karmi, a selfless actor, a selfless being who acts without any self-interest. He says only for such a person there can be any question of uh, love for one's country based on this universal love. So he says that universal love is something which is at the base of all sorts of love, and he makes a hierarchy of the different types of love. He says that at the base of it, there is love for oneself, okay, self love. Then there is love for one's kith and kin, okay, for one's family, for one's children, uh, their spouse, and so on and so forth. And then, even higher than that, there is love for one's country. And this is what Bankim Chandra calls Swadesh Priti. Okay? Love for one's country, one's own country, Swadesh Priti. This is arising out of the universal love, which can only be felt if one has become a Nishkama Karmi, a selfless actor, through the perfection of Anushilan or cultivation. Okay, so at the basis of a political vision of Bankim, there is a very deep rooted theological view where one has to become a Nishkama Karmi, one has to have true devotion in their heart. Only then they will be able to feel universal love, which encompasses all countries, all nationalities, all human beings of all color, race, and creed, and even animals. So, all living beings are a part of that universal love. They are subject to this universal love. And the cream of this universal love, according to Bankim Chandra, is expressed in Swadesh Priti, or love for one's country, which he places at the highest rung of the hierarchy of the three kinds of love, or three types of love: love for one's country, love for one's kith and kin, and love for oneself. Okay, so in the scheme of uh, Bankim Chandra's idea of nation, a political vision, at the root of it, there is a very profound theological point of view coming from the Anushilan Tattva. Now, maybe you
Yeah.
can ask this question.
Yeah. My question was that this Onushilan way of life, where you are supposed to balance out all your, let's say, tendencies and your faculties. Now, when you were first saying this, the first thing that came to my mind is, okay, this is exactly opposite of what usually Indian or mainly Bengali parents do, which is if they are only bad in studies, only then usually they get into sports, or if they are good in studies, they are not going to be allowed to even go out for 5 minutes in the evening, and then they become unhealthy. 12-year-old kids are dying today, 16-year-old kids are dying. Now, I always thought this tendency is generally seen all over the country because of the caste system, that you are not supposed to do this job or that job. So that might have been sort of, let's say, preventing people from thinking about all avenues of growing up. Now, I was kind of confirmed on this view by Srila Prabhupada's book Beyond Delusion and Doubt, where the disciple is asking what tendencies should a person follow growing up. And he says that Greek people have said this, that up until you are 14, 15-year-old, try everything, be good at everything, and then whichever you are best at, then pursue that for the rest of your life. And many people who believe in birth-based casteism say that start it from the very first day. But Srila Prabhupada says that no, the parents must check the tendency of that kid and therefore start him off with on that field from when he's practically a toddler, and then he should not look at any other avenue for the rest of his life, which is kind of what today's Indian and Bengali parents also do. So where is this kind of upbringing, which is not prevalent at all in India, is coming from? And wasn't this kind of against the idea of birth-based caste system? Did not Bankim Chandra think of that?
No, there is no clash between Bankim Chandra's idea of Anushilan Tattva and what has been prevailing in India in terms of the best expression of Indian religion or the Hindu religion, because Bankim Chandra bases his idea of Anushilan Tattva on the character of Sri Krishna. Okay, so when we discuss Dharma Tattva, I think we cannot leave behind his other very important text called Krishna Charitra, where the project of Bankim Chandra is to prove rather Sri Krishna's character from the universe of characters that we can find in our Puranas and in our ancient literature. Sri Krishna's character to be the ideal human being. Okay, and why Sri Krishna is said by Bankim to be the ideal human being? Bankim says that only because Sri Krishna has been able to demonstrate in his life, as it is coming to us from the mediation of Vyasa's text, that is Mahabharata, Harivamsha, and also Srimad Bhagavata, right? These are the three main texts on which Sri Krishna's life, on the contours of Sri Krishna's life, can be based. So, on the basis of these three texts, Bankim makes an analysis of Sri Krishna's character and says that this is the most perfect character and this is the ideal human being, because only in this individual's life Anushilan has been perfected. That character is an ideal friend, that character is an ideal teacher of religion, of politics, that character is an ideal politician, that character is an ideal aesthete, and so on and so forth. So, because only in the character of Sri Krishna you get to see all the faculties that one can conceive of in the human character have been developed to their final limit, and in such a manner that one does not clash with another. One is not developed at the cost of another, so to speak. Therefore, Sri Krishna's character is the ideal character, ideal human character, according to Bankim. This he explains in Krishna Charitra, and interestingly, he also makes reference to his own text, Krishna Charitra, in Dharma Tattva as well. So, in expounding the concept of Anushilan, he frequently refers to what he has said in Krishna Charitra, as well as he had written an a commentary on the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which was not complete, an incomplete commentary. He had only gone so far as the 4th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, I think.
Okay.
So he refers to both these texts. And interestingly, Srimad Bhagavad Gita is also a text that is, organically connected to Sri Krishna. So Bankim places as his example of ideal Anushilan, the ideal practitioner of Anushilan, if I may use that term. He uses the character of Sri Krishna as that. Now, your question with regard to the clash, the supposed clash between the caste system or the varnashrama, I think you mean the varnashrama, because caste system as it is practiced and how varnashrama is originally conceived, there is a huge difference between these two. Okay, the varnashrama dharma talks about one's swabhava, and this is something that Sri Krishna also says, or Vyasa says through the mouth of Sri Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, that one should act according to one's swabhava. If one's swabhava or natural tendency is to be a fighter, then one should become a fighter. If one's natural tendency is to look into scholarly work, then they should become a scholar. But this is not to say that the scholar or the warrior, the fighter, will neglect in his or her individual life all the other aspects of their character.
I
That
see.
is to say, they must also develop their aesthetic faculty, they
I
must
see.
also develop their intellectual faculty, they must also develop their physiological faculty.
Oh,
Okay? Each and every faculty has to be developed in conjunction with another while focusing on one's uh, swabhava, that is natural tendency. And that is not something which is inherited through one's family. One can say that there is some part of it which is inherited genetically,
yeah.
because sometimes we get to see that a very great or powerful warrior's son or daughter also becomes
Huh.
a powerful warrior.
Yeah.
So, because there is a very useful help close at hand in their family,
Yeah.
therefore there is an inspiration,
Yeah.
an example, and also there is special knowledge which has
Right.
been acquired through practice.
Yeah.
So that knowledge can be passed on to the
Hmm.
children, and therefore the children sometimes pick up the
Yeah.
traits of their parents.
Yeah.
So that is a different thing.
Yeah.
Genetically, one can pick up
Yeah.
a lot of similarities.
Hmm.
But the other thing is that every human child is born with an innate swabhava or tendency, which one has to discover, and this discovery can emerge through anushilan itself.
Hmm.
Only if you allow your faculties to be developed in conjunction with each other to their highest degree, only then you can become able to discover which is your forte, which is your special power, which is your special ability.
Hmm.
Okay, unless you, let's say, make a foray into scholarly work, into fighting, into let's say entrepreneurship and so on and so forth, you won't be able to understand where exactly your talent lies.
Yeah.
So when the Indian society had not become fossilized like
Hmm.
today, or maybe not today, but let's say 50, 70, 100
Yeah.
years back,
Hmm.
when everybody's caste or jati determined their destiny,
Hmm.
or at least if not everybody, for the majority,
Yeah.
let's say. The idea was to allow a human child to cultivate their faculties to the best of their abilities,
Hmm.
to the highest limit of each and every faculty.
Hmm.
And this is what has been described by Bankim Chandra as anushilan. Okay,
Right.
and this is also found in the concept of uh, swabhava,
Hmm.
which Sri Krishna again and again repeatedly talks about in the Srimad Bhagavad.
Hmm.
So let's come back to Bankim again,
Yeah.
and Bankim's idea of Swadesh Priti,
Hmm.
which I translate as nationalism. I do not translate it as patriotism. There is a reason. Why? Because Bankim Chandra uses the word patriotism as such without translating it.
Okay.
Patriotism as an European idea,
I see.
which he describes as a vile and monstrous idea. Okay, and in this we get to see a lot of echo in Rabindranath's writings as well.
I
In
see.
perhaps the previous podcast, we were discussing about nationalism, the book by Rabindranath, which has been touted as the great denouncing by Rabindranath of the concept of nationalism in India.
Hmm.
But in reality, Rabindranath was talking about non-Indian expressions of nationalism. He was talking mainly about Western nationalism and how that Western nationalism has been imitated by certain Far Eastern countries like Japan.
Hmm.
So we get to see that in both Bankim and Rabindranath, there is this commonality of looking at European idea of patriotism
Hmm.
with suspicion, not just with suspicion, in fact, with a lot of negativity.
I
Okay,
see.
why is there a negativity? Bankim, so far as Bankim is concerned, Bankim says that the idea of European patriotism is to develop one's own society and one's country by harming another country or society, by exploiting another country or society. And in this, the Europeans have no qualms. Okay,
Hmm.
suppose the English is trying to the English are trying to develop their nation, their country. They want their country to prosper economically, culturally, etc. And in that pursuit, they will have no qualms at exploiting economically, culturally, and even racially another culture, another nation, be that the nation of the Germans or be that the nation of the Indians. Okay, and this is the idea of patriotism, which Bankim calls by the name European patriotism, uh, and he describes it as a vile and monstrous idea.
I see.
In contrast to this, he places the idea of deshopriti or swadesh priti, as I have already said, love of one's own country or nation, and that is rooted in universal love. What is that universal love? The nature of this universal love is one who is selfless and therefore able to look at every living being, man, woman, child, and animals, subhuman beings even, with an equal eye, samadrishti. Okay. Again, samadrishti, you will find a reference of samadarshana or samadrishti in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
So, the connection of Dharma Tattva or Anushilan Tattva, which is described in Dharma Tattva of Bankim, and the Srimad Bhagavad Gita and also the Mahabharata, because Srimad Bhagavad Gita itself is a part of the Mahabharata, is quite conspicuous. The connection is quite conspicuous. This also partly answers your question, how one can describe Anushilan Tattva as something that is in continuation with
Right.
the perennial Indian philosophy.
Right.
That it is not a break, that is not something entirely new.
Yeah.
And if you carefully read the Dharma Tattva, then this continuity becomes more than clear, because Bankim himself refers to the epics, specifically to the Mahabharata, and as part of the Mahabharata, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and he also refers to other texts, many of which are Dharma Shastras, such as the Manusmriti, and sometimes he also talks of the Rigveda Samhita. So there is a very clear continuity between perennial Indian philosophy and what Bankim Chandra is expounding by the name of Anushilan. So I hope that I have been able to establish the idea of universal love and how that universal love gives rise to Swadesh Priti of a special kind, that I am calling nationalism, and what Bankim Chandra had positioned in contrast to patriotism of the European kind. Okay.
Right.
From here, we will go to Rabindranath.
Yeah.
Now, before making this transition, do you want to raise any questions,
Yeah.
maybe from you or from the audience's side?
I had a query that, so if
Okay.
Bankim's idea of nationalism is different from Rabindranath, the way you described Bankim's idea of the word nation or nationalism, that seems like the translation for com, right?
No, no, no. I have not said that there is an essential difference between how Rabindranath understood nationalism and how Bankim understood nationalism.
Okay.
All I have said, let me clarify. All I have said is that Rabindranath's terminology and Bankim's terminology are somewhat different. Okay. Why? Because there is a difference in understanding, there is a difference in perspective in how Rabindranath approaches the concept of nation and how Bankim approaches the concept of nation. Remember,
Okay.
I'm using the word nation as a word of European origin, as an English word. Okay.
Right.
So Rabindranath talks about Samaja in his Atto Shakti, the anthology of essays that I will be majorly talking about in today's talk. And Bankim also talks about Samaja. But when they are translating this word, and in fact, Rabindranath uses the translation more often,
Okay.
which is also more understandable, because a lot of time has passed between Bankim and Rabindranath. Not a lot, but at least a decade or more than a decade, in fact, has passed before Rabindranath starts talking about Samaj in Atto Shakti. I think Atto Shakti came out in 1902, and Bankim's Dharma Tattva came out in 1888.
Okay.
I think it's important to mention these years,
Yeah.
because then we'll be able to appreciate the difference in time between Bankim Chandra and Rabindranath.
Right.
Now, This is not to say that Bankim was not banking on non-Indian expressions of nation, nation state, or society.
Okay.
He was also using certain uh, Western ideas, mainly coming from Herbert Spencer, okay, and also coming from Auguste Comte, okay,
Okay.
the French philosopher Comte,
Hmm.
who was a positivist philosopher.
Hmm.
Now, I need to mention this fact that positivism in the time of Bankim, at least when Bankim was writing his Anandamot and Dharma Tattva, 1882, 1888, these years, in Bengal, there was a craze for positivism, just like there is a craze about Marxism, let's say, in today's time.
Hmm.
So it was fashionable for educated Bengalis to follow the positivist philosophy, just as it was fashionable, it is, at, just as it is fashionable among today's Bengalis, and also in other ethnicities
Yeah.
in the educated sector, in the educated section of other ethnicities, to follow Marxism. That's a
Hmm.
fashionable.
Hmm.
But Bankim uses positivism with a pinch of salt, actually with lots of salt, because he uses the concept of universal love as a special expression which can be found in Hindu darshanas,
Hmm.
but which has a clear echo in a modern European philosophy.
Hmm.
So, positivism, as expounded by Auguste Comte, is basically an atheistic philosophy. There is no place of the divine or the God in it. Okay,
Hmm.
but Hindu darshana and Bankim's philosophy of Anushilan Tattva is an out and out, God-based or divine-based
Hmm.
system. Okay, so divinity plays a fundamental role. God plays a fundamental role in Bankim's Anushilan Tattva, in Dharma Tattva, and in other texts,
Yeah.
but not so in Auguste Comte. Therefore, Bankim has only used expressions, echoes of ideas that he finds in Hindu Darshana. And why does he refer to these European philosophers like Auguste Comte or Herbert Spencer? Because he is appealing to a special section of Indians, namely the educated Bengalis, who are finding these philosophers and their philosophies to be fashionable in their time.
Okay.
Therefore, in expounding Hindu Darshana,
Hmm.
he is using certain expressions that can be borrowed, that can be found in the philosophies of these uh, philosophers of Bankim's contemporary times.
Hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Now, coming to this the question of similarity or difference between Bankim's idea of nation and Rabindranath's idea of nation. I have said that Bankim and Rabindranath both are using the word samaj in their Bengali essays when they are talking about, the concept that we can now think of as nation. Okay, but Rabindranath creates a lot of problem because he uses the word nation in the same sense as nation state. So in Atmashakti, you will see the first essay in that anthology is called Nation Key. What is nation? Okay, he uses the word nation intact in the same form. The English word has been borrowed into his Bangla terminology in his Bangla essay. He titles it as Nation Key. What is nation? And then he goes on to bank on the philosophy of a French thinker called Ernest Renan. Okay, so he talks about Renan's idea of nation, and he shows that according to Renan, nation is a spiritual community, and
Okay.
this is something that Tagore agrees with.
Hmm.
Okay, but after explaining this concept of a spiritual community, by spiritual I do not mean something that has to do with only God. It has to do with the spirit, which has God or theology as one part. The other part of this spirit is a universe of feelings. Okay, feeling of brotherhood, feeling of belonging to a place, feeling of love at the highest level. Okay, love for one's country is something that is fundamental to this spiritual community, and according to Tagore, who's expounding about uh, Ernest Rena's idea of nation. He says it's a spiritual entity, first of all, one that is created through a deep historical churning. So, through a profound churning of time and experiences that a community shares through time. Okay?
Hmm.
A nation is a spiritual family or community. This is the expression that Tagore uses while expounding on Rena's idea of nation. Tagore points out that, according to Rena, nation is based on two things. One, shared memory of the past,
Right.
and second, consensual cohabitation of people to properly preserve a shared inheritance of material as well as spiritual wealth.
Hmm.
Again, when I say spiritual, it is not only religious or theological, but something that has to do with mind, something that has to do with the spirit. Okay,
Hmm.
you will see that in several European languages, not in English, but in Italian, for example, the translation for the English word mind is spirit. Okay,
Okay.
so in that sense, spiritual as well as material inheritance that a people
Hmm.
inherits as a legacy from their ancestors. And because of a common will to preserve, to properly preserve this common inheritance, they consent to living together. Okay, so this is a consensual cohabitation of
Hmm.
people to properly preserve a shared inheritance of material as well as spiritual.
Hmm.
Okay. No nation, Tagore says further in his commentary of Rena's idea, no nation, as no man, can readily make itself. So, in other sense, there is no concept of a tabula rasa or a blank slate.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
A nation, like a man, is made of long years of efforts, sacrifices, loyalty, and devotion. These are the expressions that Tagore uses. Okay,
Okay.
long years of efforts, sacrifices of self-interests, of course,
Hmm.
of loyalty and devotion. These are four very important ingredients
Hmm.
that can go on to construct a nation.
Hmm.
Okay, so it is not an imaginary or imagined community
Hmm.
like Benedict Anderson says.
Hmm.
It is rather a very concretely felt community.
Okay.
Okay, where does this feeling reside according to Tagore's commentary of Rena? Okay, that is based on shared memory from the past,
Hmm.
and secondly, in the present will of the people to preserve whatever they have inherited. Also, Tagore says the nation is seldom a finished product. Okay, it is not something that is written in stone. It is
Hmm.
always in the making.
Hmm.
It is being continuously expressed. Tagore says it is being continuously expressed. Obhivyakti is the word that he uses in Bangla,
Okay.
in more and more clearer terms. So, according to uh, Tagore, a living nation is continuously expressing itself so as to make itself clearer to
Hmm.
its present and future
Hmm.
generations. Effort spanning a long arch of time, willful sacrifice of self interests, and devotion. These are the main elements or ingredients through which a nation is being continuously expressed, constructed, built.
Okay.
Okay? We are, Tagore says, in significant parts already made by our ancestors.
Hmm.
To deny this
Hmm.
or act in contradiction to this fact, which is biological as well as psychological fact, to deny this and act in contradiction to these biological and psychological fact would be self-defeating, would be futile. It will not just be, destructive, it will be futile because it will give you no results.
Hmm.
He says that the heroic and magnanimous acts of the past of our ancestors constitute the edifice of national feeling,
Hmm.
national bhav. He uses the word nation, once again I repeat, as it is in Bangla, and therefore he also uses the derivative national as it is in Bangla. He
Hmm.
says that national feeling is made of the heroic and magnanimous acts done by the past, members of this spiritual community, our
Hmm.
ancestors.
Hmm.
a common object of glory inherited from the past, and a common will, knowledge of great deeds done together in the past, and the determination to do similar or greater, even greater deeds together once again in the here and now, in the present time. That is the surest foundation for making a nation. Okay. After explaining this concept of nation, or rather commentating on the concept of nation as given by Ernest Rena, Tagore goes on to talk about the Indian idea of nation and Indian idea of nationalism. And there he starts with the concept of samaja. He says that for Indians, and there, very interestingly, he again conflates the term Indian, Bharatvarshiya, with the term Hindu. Okay, and it is
Right.
in this essay, I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think for the first time ever, Tagore uses the term Hindutva. Okay,
Okay.
following the tradition of Bankim and Chandranath. Okay,
Right.
because they are his predecessors in using the term Hindu.
Right.
But Rabindranath surpasses these two in how frequently he is going to use the term Hindutva. As I
Okay.
have indicated earlier
Yeah.
elsewhere and also on this podcast, that at least across 7 different Bengali essays, Rabindranath has used the term Hindutva,
Okay.
okay, 22 times, at least 22 times, which is the highest by any writer in the list of these people that I have just mentioned, Bankim, Chandranath, and Rabindranath.
Okay.
Now, Rabindranath's idea of Hindutva is completely similar to the idea of the Samaja.
Right.
And this is the Samaja which he talks about in a very specific and in a very uh, uh, powerful expression in Atmashakti's other essay, which is called Swadeshi Samaj. Okay,
Okay.
very significantly, Swadeshi Samaj or Swadeshi Samaj, as those who speak Hindi or even in Sanskrit, you can use it in that pronunciation. Swadeshi Samaj is an essay which he had read out in the Minerva Theatre in Kolkata,
Okay.
uh, right at the beginning of the Swadeshi movement,
Okay.
which has been described by Haridas Mukherjee and Uma Mukherjee as the beginning of the Swadeshi movement proper.
Okay.
This particular essay being read out. So it was a speech that he had prepared in the written form, and
Okay.
later on it got published in the form of an essay in Atmashakti, Swadeshi
Okay.
Samaj.
Okay.
And along with Swadeshi Samaj, he also talks about the concept of Atmashakti. So
Right.
Rabindranath's concept of Swadeshi Samaj and Atmashakti are mutually, complemented. They
Right.
complement each other.
Right.
What does he mean by Atmashakti? He means by Atmashakti the same concept that nowadays in political parlance, and especially coming from the BJP, Atmanirbharta. Uh,
Right.
so something that uh, a nation, a samaja, does not have to depend on an outside entity, an outside agency, be it a foreign agency, be it a government which has been created out of its own social body. So he says that when a samaja is looking for, let's say, education, let's say sanitation, these are things that this samaja should be able to create for itself without looking for help towards an external entity, and especially not looking at the government. The moment we start become dependent, the moment we start to become dependent upon the government or this external agency, which may be a foreign power,
Yeah.
we lose our Atmashakti, and at that moment, the Samaj or the Samaja starts to disintegrate. It becomes weaker and therefore it becomes disintegrated.
I see.
And it is from that idea of Swadeshi Samaj and Atmashakti that Swadeshi as well as boycott, these two passive as well as active methods of resistance, came into play in the larger Swadeshi movement. We get to see that Sri Aurobindo will pick this up and use it in his speech made in 1907, if I'm not wrong, 1907, where he talks about boycott and passive resistance, non-cooperation. Boycott is not just boycotting, tangible goods made by foreign mills, by the mills in England, but also the institutions that the foreign government has given us,
Hmm.
such as the court,
Hmm.
such as the university,
Hmm.
which is why there is a talk of creating national institutes of dispensing justice, dispensing education, and therefore we have something like the National Education, the National Council of Education, rather, come up in Bengal.
I
Okay,
see.
so non-cooperation and passive resistance are being expressed through this idea of swadeshi and boycott, which is rooted in Rabindranath's ideas of Attoshakti, uh, in today's term Atmanirbharata, and Swadeshi Samaj. So, in Rabindranath's vision, a Swadeshi Samaj is that which is self-dependent, which does not look to an external agency,
Hmm.
which does not look to even a government that it has itself built for all the things that it needs. It has in its own body, in its own units, through the members. And this is where the concept of Varnashrama again becomes very important,
Hmm.
because in another anthology called Bharatvarsho, uh, this is another anthology of essays by Rabindranath, he talks about the concept of Varnashrama in the sense of Swabhava Chita Karma, that is, one's tendency will decide one's Varna. Okay, so he mentions that the Vaidyas of Bengal, of his contemporary times, are talking about their Swabhava as amenable to scholarly work, and therefore they are talking about uh, you know, investing themselves with the sacred thread, the Upavita or Poite.
Hmm.
Okay, he also mentions rather the churning that was going on in the Kayastha Samaja. Maybe there was some organization in this time of the Kayasthas who are talking about their shared ancestry from the Kshatriyas. Therefore,
Hmm.
they should also take up the symbol of the Dvija or the twice born Varanas, and therefore they should also be using this Poite or Janeu or the Upavita.
Why didn't they already have it to begin with?
No, in Bengal,
Only
because
Brahmins
in
were
Bengal
using.
only Brahmins were,
Right. Right.
studying the Vedas.
Right.
Okay, unlike what is prescribed in our fundamental texts, that
Hmm.
that all the twice born
Yeah.
people should be studying the Vedas.
Yeah.
Of course, the Brahman has the prerogative to teach the Vedas. The other
Right.
two, namely Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, they do not have the prerogative to teach the Vedas,
Hmm.
but all three have access to the Vedas.
Yeah.
And Rabindranath is advocating this demand coming from the different Bengali castes, such as Boidos and Kayasthas, to invest themselves with the sacred thread or the
Hmm.
Janeu or the Poite, Upavita.
Right.
So, by mentioning this, Rabindranath is connecting the concept of Atmashakti and Swadeshi Samaj with a very fundamentally Hindu view of society,
Hmm.
where the individual banks on his or her personality, his or her personal tendencies, innate tendencies, which is best described by the term Swabhava. And according to the Swabhava, they will be cultivating their special gifts in order to be useful to the society. So
Right.
this is the idea of Swadeshi Samaj, which Rabindranath gave us through Atmashakti, that anthology that I mentioned. And this became a powerful concept, a very powerful idea in the Swadeshi movement and going forward in the mainstream of Indian national freedom
Hmm.
movement, because you get to see that after Aurobindo mentions the concepts of passive resistance and non-cooperation in the form of Swadeshi and boycott, that gets picked up by the next major protagonist of Indian national movement, that is Mahatma Gandhi. He
Hmm.
also starts talking about the same two concepts of passive resistance and
Yeah.
non-cooperation. Many people actually think that these were his original ideas, but no,
Okay.
uh, he might be coming to it from a personal approach. He might have his own expressions, but the ideas themselves were expressed before Mahatma Gandhi, uh, by Sri Aurobindo in 1907. And before Sri Aurobindo, these ideas can be found in Rabindranath.
I
And
see.
if you try to find the influence that Rabindranath is using, Rabindranath himself is banking upon, then we have to go to the example of Bankim. Because it is in Bankim that we get to see that a society has been envisioned, a samaj has been envisioned on the basis of this concept of anushilan. Therefore, I think that anybody who's trying to understand the history of Indian freedom movement should trace this lineage of ideas, starting with Bankim, Anushilan Tattva in Dharma Tattva, and then coming to Bankim's influence upon Rabindranath and how Rabindranath made new expressions out of that influence
Yeah.
through Atma Shakti, through self-dependence, through self-sufficiency, and from that Swadeshi, boycott, non-cooperation, and passive resistance,
Right.
picked up by Sri Aurobindo and later on expressed by Mahatma Gandhi in his own
Yeah.
way.
Right. Fascinating history. Sir, do you have any more time to take some questions?
Yeah, I have some 10,
Okay.
15 more minutes.
I have two, three questions myself, and there are lots of questions here as well. Okay.
Sure.
Firstly, I wanted to know at what age did Rabindranath last use the word Hindutva in his essays?
That's very difficult for me to tell because
Okay.
the seven essays that I mentioned,
Yeah.
which in which the word Hindutva occurs at least 22 times. All those essays were written between 1894 and 1913 or 15.
Okay.
So all these essays have been written within a span of, let's say, 20 years or so.
Right.
So Rabindranath was talking about the concept of Hindutva majorly through the period of the Swadeshi movement,
Hmm.
because you get to see that the Swadeshi movement can be traced back to 1901 with people like Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay and Brahmabandhu Upadhyay, and also Sister Nivedita.
Hmm.
Uh, Swami Vivekananda himself was alive at that time.
Hmm.
He passed away in July 1902. So
Okay.
Rabindranath has already started churning the
Yeah.
ideas that he has received from Bankim, and
Yeah.
Bankim's influence is very, very prominent on Rabindranath, at least in these formative years of the Swadeshi movement's preparation,
Yeah.
right? And Rabindranath talks about Indian nationalism in different expressions without using the term Hindutva in his mature years. In the late 1920s, in the 1930s. He passed away in 1941. So we get to see that in Ghorowa, which is actually a memoir of Abanindranath Tagore, the
Okay.
famous painter and nephew of Rabindranath.
Yeah.
Rabindranath was given the manuscript of Ghorowa before it became published. And when
Okay.
he was reading this manuscript, Rani Chandra, who had basically transcribed Rabindranath's narration, had given it to him. Rabindranath got a chance to read it. And when he was reading it, he came to that particular episode or set of episodes where the Swadeshi movement era was being described. And Ramachandra says that Ramachandra describes in the introduction to Ghorowa that Rabindranath became very, very excited when he was reading that particular episode because he had found himself in the most alive and in the most expressive manner in that particular era. In fact, Rabindranath has said in so many words, as recorded by Ramachandra in Ghorowa's introduction, that Rabindranath is saying it is in that period, meaning in the Swadeshi movement's period, the Swadeshi movement era,
Hmm.
starting from 1901 to let's say 1911,
Hmm.
that I find myself to be most alive. Right now, what you get to see is just a skeleton. Okay,
Okay.
but even that skeleton of Rabindranath in 1939, just 2 years before his passing, he has made this comment, and at the same time, in the same year, he is making a comment about the future leadership of India, and in that he clearly identifies Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's brand of politics as the way forward for Indian national freedom movement, and he declares Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose as the leader. Okay, I'm
Hmm.
emphasizing on the word the leader for the Indian nation, not
Right.
just for the Bengali people. So we
Right.
get to see that Rabindranath always had this. I don't know what to. We should. the word weakness be proper for this? Maybe preference would be a more proper word. Rabindranath always had a latent preference for a more bold and clearly expressed, and if I may use the term, manly expression of
Yeah.
nationalism. You know, he had a preference for this.
Hmm.
And I think I had also mentioned an incident when Jyotin Das, uh, the member of Bhagat Singh's coterie, when he passed away after a fast, long
Hmm.
63-day long fast
Hmm.
in the Lahore jail,
Hmm.
how disturbed he had become, and he had written a very fiery poem out of it, a song actually, Sarva Parvatari
Yeah. Yeah.
So Rabindranath always had this preference for the macho expression of nationalism, uh, and uh, he himself had preferred the vritti, or the profession of the Brahmana,
Hmm.
because according to his own self-reading,
Hmm.
we get to see it in various writings, in Jivan Sriti, in Shantiniketan, in Vishwabharati. These are names of his essays. These are
Okay.
just not plain names of places and
I see.
institutions. These are also names of his essays.
Okay.
There he explains how he found his own calling to be teaching and man making, in the
Hmm.
words of Vivekananda.
Right.
This is also visible in another very important protagonist of the Swadeshi movement, in particular, and the Indian national movement in general, namely Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay, and also in Brahmabandhu Upadhyay, who was the only help in the formative years of the Brahmacharya ashram in Shantiniketan that Rabindranath was trying to set up.
Right. So this era that you are describing, it seems to me that we've always known growing up that okay, these people were intellectual stalwarts. I'm now realizing how much of a stalwart they were. There's so many ideas that we can let's talk about for hours and hours in both religion, society, politics, everything. What has happened
Indeed,
to our society? Where are these? Look at the number of ideas we discussed today in this just 1 hour. So, uh, uh, is it gone just because of economics, or will we ever have such people again?
well, even though I'm not going to make a prophecy about it, but the very reason, I can speak for myself, the very reason that I keep talking about this particular era in India's, and in particular Bengal's history, is my hope that somebody, at least a few people, will pick up these ideas and they will meditate upon it, and they will try to make something out of it, not
Yeah,
just in terms of scholarly contribution, but also in terms of character building.
yeah.
So I think that this concept of anushilan that Bankim Chandra was talking about in
Hmm.
Dharmatattva, this idea of developing one's faculties, all-round development of every bit of human faculty, that was something that was majorly present in the stalwarts of the Swadeshi movement
Hmm.
era. Okay, we get to see an eruption of uh, ideas,
Yeah,
eruption of actions, not just ideas but
yeah.
actions on the ground, not just in terms of revolutionary politics or politics of arms,
Hmm.
but also in terms of creating new institutions which are revolutionary in itself,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
So the idea of boycotting the University of Calcutta, the greatest institution that the British had uh, created
Yeah.
in India, at least in terms of that time of
Hmm.
the Swadeshi movement,
Hmm.
the Swadeshi leaders are talking about boycotting it, and
Hmm.
they are trying to create an alternative institution which becomes the National Council of Education, and later on what became the Jagatpur University, right?
I
So
see.
they were talking about not just destruction but also of construction. Destruction
Exactly.
is maybe too strong a word,
Yeah.
but they were talking about boycotting something and creating something in its place.
Yeah.
So they were offering alternatives,
Right.
and these attempts to create alternatives in itself was revolutionary.
Yeah.
And revolution is not just in terms of how many arms and how much
Hmm.
violence one uses in their expression of politics.
Yeah. This seems to be completely opposite of today's era, where let's say most, both on all sides of the spectrum, most people are throwing, let's say, like it's a children's tantrum mainly, that okay, here I can see a problem and why don't you solve it? Well, someone should solve that problem. It's like that. But these people were giving out ideas upon ideas and then building upon each other's ideas as well. And
Right, and not just building up on ideas, they are also trying to build something tangible out of
right,
those ideas. And
right.
this needed a lot of self sacrifice on their part. They had to let go of a lot of self interest. All
Hmm.
these individuals that I mentioned, Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay, Brahmabandhu Upadhyay, and Rabindranath Tagore himself,
Hmm.
they have made enormous self sacrifices, the scale of which, the kind of which that we can not even imagine in today's time.
Hmm.
I do not know whether it will be possible to create human beings of their stature again, like you were asking, but I do hope that by laying out these ideas, laying out these histories
Hmm.
of these people, their ideas, and their actions, will create some inspiration, will stir some people's hearts.
Right. Okay, so this is the last question from my side. Then, if you have time, we'll get into some audience questions.
Sure.
Would it be fair to say that Rabindranath's idea of nation, where cohabitation without shared spirituality or shared heroes, shared past, is not really possible, then was his idea inaccurate or incomplete? Because today we are cohabiting with people who don't have a shared spirituality or shared heroes even, or he was right and we are in fact sitting on a ticking time bomb.
Rabindranath was not unaware of this situation
Hmm.
where a completely different outlook, a completely different worldview is cohabiting with the Hindu worldview or outlook. And because he did not experience 1946, because he did not experience partition, perhaps he was confident, like many of his contemporaries, of assimilating the other. Okay, so he had this great confidence in the Hindu power of assimilating. He
Hmm.
actually talks about this in Atmashakti as well. In Bharatbashio Samaj, that is the name of the essay in Atmashakti, right after Nation Key, where he talks about the unique power of the Indian civilization and he identifies it as the power to assimilate the other. He talks about a long arch of Indian history where the Scythians have been assimilated, the Huns have been assimilated, and various other, the Kushanas have been assimilated into the great body of the Hindu nation.
Hmm.
Uh, and he also similarly expresses that whatever other elements we can see today in his times, when he was writing this essay, will at some future date, not very far from his time, will also be assimilated.
Hmm.
But I am not so sure about what he would have said or written if he had experienced 1946, the kind of
Hmm.
religious turmoil and the violence and also the partition of the country. Okay, I think that is something that only can be speculated, and
Yeah.
it's not very safe to speculate.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so do you have any more time for audience questions?
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay. Dada asks, was Rabindranath also, while writing Shivaji Utsav, was very much expounding his notion of nationalism through it?
Yes, very much so.
Hmm.
So, Rabindranath identifies Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj as one of those rare instances in pre modern India. By pre modern, I mean the time before the Europeans came to
Hmm.
India. Uh, one of those rare instances of Indian nationalism expressing itself.
Exactly.
So, the special idea of Indian nationalism that Rabindranath has,
Hmm.
where Samaja
Hmm.
is at the center,
Hmm.
he says has been captured, imagined, assimilated, and expressed very well by
Hmm.
the vision that Shivaji had.
Right.
And Rabindranath is very clear about it. He says that this sort of idea has been envisioned by only a few people.
Hmm.
He names them, he actually makes a list of such people. He mentions Guru Nanak, he mentions Sant Kabir, he mentions Guru Gobind Singh, he mentions Sri Chaitanya Dev from Bengal, and finally he also mentions Chhatrapati Shivaji. So, according to him, either by Shastra or by Shastra, that is through weapons or through knowledge, or through the idea of God,
Right.
the love of God. These various personalities were trying to assimilate and thus create a nation. So, in Rabindranath's expression, all these people that I just mentioned are nation builders. They're not just, let's say, a warlord or a political leader or a king or a guru or some sort of religious preacher. No, that's their uh, identity, of course, but it's only part of their identity for Rabindranath. For Rabindranath, mainly, these people are nation builders. When Guru Gobind is trying to expound the new expression or the Sikh Panth, okay, there he is trying to assimilate the Turk, that is uh, uh, the Islamic society,
Right.
which has flourished in India in his time, into the great body of the Hindu nation. When Kabir Das is talking about his love for Ram, he is also assimilating these two apparently unassimilable parts of the Indian society. When Sri Chaitanya is spreading the Nama of Hari, which is not supposed to be traditionally, from a very traditional Orthodox point of view, the Nama, the Diksha mantra, cannot be given to just anybody. Okay, this is
Okay.
something that we have in common between Sri Chaitanya Deva and Sri Ramanujacharya. Of course, Ramanujacharya was from the 11th and 12th century, a very long time ago, and Sri Chaitanya Deva was from 16th century, relatively modern.
Yeah.
So, Sri Chaitanya Deva is spreading the name of Hari across caste, creed, and even religion, which is why we get to see several Muslim devotees, disciples of Sri Chaitanya Deva, who have also taken Nama Diksha from him. So all these people are assimilators of the same Hindu lineage of leaders, thought leaders, political leaders, religious leaders who are building the nation, who are,
Right.
in Rena's expression, nation is not
Right.
a finished product, it is always being expressed and it is always in the making. The generation that comes after the past, one generation after another, is going on making more and more clearer expression. That is all.
Would you care to add anyone to that list from after Rabindranath's era? Maybe people he didn't
Oh,
see.
definitely, definitely. So I would name people like Sri Ramakrishna as another very important figure who tried to assimilate various religions into the great body of the Hindu nation and the Hindu religion itself. So when people talk about his Sarvadharma Samanvay, I think many people talk about it in a derogatory sense without properly understanding its context. In fact, in one place, in um, let me look out. Let me find out the particular reference. Actually, um, yes, ভারতবর্ষের কার্যপ্রণালী. My mode of action in India. This is an essay or speech that Swami Vivekananda has written or spoken. There he talks about the actual role of Sri Ramakrishna, and he says, I quote, when the Muslims first came to India, there were, according to their historical records, 60 crores of Hindus in India. This calculation suffers rather from underestimation than exaggeration, for lots of people perished solely through the persecution of the Muslims. Therefore, it is obvious that the number of the Hindus was even more than 60 crores, on no account less than that. But today, the same Hindus have dwindled into 20 crores in the time that Swami Vivekananda is writing this. Over and above that, with the ascendancy of the Christian powers, about 2 crores of people have become Christians, and more than a lakh of people are becoming Christians every year. Then he says, and I quote again, they should be emphasized specially. It is specially for the preservation of the Hindu race and religion that Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of mercy, has incarnated himself. So this is what Swami Vivekananda is saying. He's identifying Sri Ramakrishna uh, as one of those personalities, one of those religious leaders, thought leaders, political leaders that Mother India has birthed, who are the great assimilators.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's that.
Right. Okay. One question directly to response to these topics is that they all failed. So now what should we do? Shouldn't we just care only for those who are Hindus and ignore non-Hindus?
Okay, so to answer this, I will pick up a line from Bankim. Bankim says that universal love is the root of swadeshi. Now, what does he mean when he says that universal love is the root of swadeshi? He says that according to the Hindu view, universal love is a virtue. Okay, so that is another expression for ahimsa paramo dharma. What does ahimsa paramo dharma actually mean in this context when he says universal love as the basis for swadesh priti or nationalism, love for one's country? He says that I will care for my own people, for my own nation, my samaja, without harming anybody else.
Hmm.
Okay, if I can. If I can, I will not cause any harm to any other nation like the Europeans do in order for their own prosperity. They exploit other societies, other cultures, other nations.
Hmm.
So Bankim says that according to the Hindu mode of acting, in the Hindu mode of prospering the nation, uh, there should be no attempt at exploiting or harming any other nation. But that does not mean that I will be getting the beating from any foreign power or external power while I'm trying to develop my own nation.
Hmm.
If there is an attack, if there is an invasion, if there is some sort of mischief that is going on the part of external players, on the part of foreign
Yeah.
nations and other people, then I must stand up and I must call upon the Kshatriyas in the Samaja in
Huh.
order to defend this Samaja. Because, again, he says, why should there be a defense? He says that if you do not defend the Samaja, then there will be nobody to care for.
Yeah.
And therefore, universal love itself will lose meaning.
Right.
So, like charity begins at home, universal love begins at one's own nation, one's
Right.
own country or samaj.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you have nobody left in your own samaja, who will you care for?
Yeah.
Therefore, in order to practice universal love, ahimsa paramo dharma, you must care for the prosperity of your own samaja or nation without harming, exploiting other external societies.
Right.
Okay, if you can.
Yeah.
Okay. But there may be instances, this is something that he mentions in Bharata Kalanko,
Okay.
a Bangla essay that he had written, that there may be instances where in order to prosper, I must cause some form of harm to other people. Okay, what is that instance? Explicitly in the case of war, in the
Hmm.
case of an out and out clash, a physical clash,
Hmm.
a violent clash between two people. Here, if you think that I am not going to do harm
Hmm.
and I'm simply going to somehow magically save my people, maybe through mendicancy or through pleading or
Hmm. Hmm.
through begging.
Hmm.
Mendicancy, by the way, is a word that I have taken out of Sri Aurobindo, because mendicancy politics is the term that he uses in order to describe
Okay.
the moderates in Congress, because
Right.
of which there was a break.
Yeah.
So mendicancy towards the British, who is more powerful and who's not particularly favorable to
Yeah.
Indians, that is not going to work out.
Yeah.
Okay, there you, in order to practice universal love,
Yeah.
you have to begin caring for your own people, and there you have to resist, and that resistance can sometimes also take violent
Yeah.
forms.
These are basically in the current times. The people like Karl Popper and Nassim Taleb are saying these things only. Open society and its enemies. You can't be tolerant of the intolerant. That's all.
Of course, because all these ideas are rooted in common sense.
Yeah. Okay. We have one question about again the usual questions of Raja Rammohn Roy. Would you take it now or leave it for the Raja Rammohn Roy episode?
Yeah, I think you have to hold it for the Raja
Yeah.
Rammohn Roy
Okay.
episode,
Okay.
because today we talked about the concept of nation nationalism
Yeah.
from two very important figureheads of
Yeah.
Indian nationalism, namely Bankim Chandra and Rabindranath.
Yeah.
And I think we should meditate on the ideas that we
Hmm.
have discussed today.
Yeah.
If possible, if you have access to the Bengali texts that I have mentioned, Dharma Tattva, Bharata Kalanko, Bangala Kalanko by Bankim and Attoshakti and Ghoroa by Rabindranath and Abanindranath. Please read them. I will, request you, please read them. It's unfortunate that most of these texts are not translated. If possible, in some future date, I will try to translate them.
Yeah.
As I have already translated some of these texts, in Attoshakti, there is a essay called Bharatbharshi Samaj, which I have partly translated.
Okay.
And I have also translated another essay I mentioned today called Brahmana, which is
Okay.
part of another anthology by Rabindranath called Bharatbharshi.
I see.
So please read them, meditate on these ideas, and have a good time.
Yeah. Sir, would you take one last question?
Okay, sure.
This is from a regular viewer of ours, so therefore
Okay,
I'm taking it. Would
let's
it be
hear
right
what's
to
there.
say Bankim, Tagore, etc. saw the zero-sum nature of European ideas? That's all.
Yes, I think that's a pithy expression. Okay, it's a very
Okay.
useful way to put it.
I
So
see.
they were able to identify the destructive nature of Europe, European civilization, but at the same time, they were not oblivious to the good things that were coming to Europe.
Right.
And in Bharatbharshi Samaj, as well as in Nation Key, the two essays that we discussed today from Rabindranath, there is a specific mention to this zero sum nature of the European civilization. He
I
says
see.
that wherever Europe is trying to create universal brotherhood, wherever it is trying to create some ground for unity for the humankind,
Yeah.
Europe is doing good. And this good is a global thing. This is something that can be visible, let's say, in Africa, in some certain parts of the Americas, and also in India, maybe in China as well. But the same Europe is doing lots and lots of destructive things in all these areas that I have just mentioned, and especially in India, he talks about where the it's not even zero sum. The negative factors are getting the better of it. So
Right.
Rabindranath is very, very acutely aware of this dual nature of the European civilization, and he is appreciative of the good that Europe has done. He is actually one of the beneficiaries of this lineage that I have traced from Ram Mohan to Bankim to Rabindranath.
Right.
Therefore, this can be seen as one of the good things that has come from the interventions from Europe, and the same thing can be said about other protagonists of the Indian freedom movement as well, mostly in the case of uh, Sri Aurobindo and Mahatma Gandhi. In fact, if I can mention Mahatma Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, a seminal text by Mahatma Gandhi, my favorite work by him,
Okay.
there Mahatma Gandhi is, very critical of the European civilization. At the same
Yeah.
time, he mentions the essential good that Europe has done. So he uh, appreciates the good. He
Okay.
makes a fair critique of the
Okay.
European civilization.
I see. Okay, sir. Thank you then. Thank you for staying over your time, and thank you for this extremely enlightening conversation. I found out many new things today.
Glad to be a part of this. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
Good
sir.
night.
Hope to have you back soon discussing other stalwarts of Bengal.
Would love to.
Yeah.
Thanks.